Warning: the following program contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion advised. You're listening to Descent to Depravity, where we investigate the darkest corners of the human psyche, one chilling story at a time.
Did you kill her?
No, sir.
Then how did she die because of your anger?
Because Ed and I brought the dead beer from the first place.
Okay. You punched her, you kicked her, you stomped her. This is a child. It's a young child we're talking about here. You want to play like games.
I'm not playing no game with you, man.
Well, you know what? She's defenseless. You're cat and mouse with me. I killed her because of my hatred. Well, what does that mean, Anthony?
March 7th, 2009. Anthony Kirkland had already taken 3 lives, 3 women who vanished into the forgotten corners of Cincinnati. Their murders had gone unsolved, their names barely whispered outside the neighborhoods they came from. But fate has a way of turning monsters careless. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, 13-year-old Esme Kenny went jogging near a reservoir not far from home. Just a girl with her iPod, her purple wristwatch, and no reason to be afraid. She never returned. Her mother's calls went unanswered.
Came to our door very early morning and told us that Esme was dead.
Can you identify that person?
That's my daughter, Esme.
Her dinner sat untouched, cooling in the quiet domestic stillness that precedes panic. As the sun fell behind the tree line, the serenity of suburban Cincinnati began to fracture. Police cruisers drifted through the neighborhood, their rotating lights staining the woods in pulses of crimson and blue, searching for a child who would never come home. What unfolded within those woods dismantled the illusion of safety. Beneath the city's calm veneer, a predator had been operating undetected, methodical, remorseless, and already responsible for multiple deaths. Esme Kenny's disappearance would become the thread that unraveled his facade, the moment Cincinnati's hidden killer was finally brought into the light. Anthony Kirkland was born on September 13, 1968, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a home defined by chaos and cruelty. His father was a volatile man, quick to anger and brutal in punishment. Beatings were frequent, administered with belts, cords, whatever was at hand. Emotional cruelty accompanied physical violence. Humiliation was a household language. His mother, overwhelmed and powerless, often stood by helplessly as the abuse unfolded. Kirkland grew up in an environment where pain was predictable, almost routine. He later told evaluators that the beatings stopped hurting after a while, not because they lessened, but because he numbed himself to survive. By adolescence, the scars on his psyche were deep. Teachers noted his withdrawal, violent outbursts, and lack of empathy. A juvenile probation officer once described him as emotionally detached, but prone to sudden explosive anger. He began running away from home for days at a time, drifting between relatives' houses, sleeping in abandoned buildings, and slipping further from any sense of structure. School attendance fractured. Relationships with authority were hostile. This was a boy growing into a young man without boundaries, trust, or stability. Only simmering rage and alienation. And in 1987, at just 18 years old, that rage would erupt for the first time in a way no one could ignore. The warmth of late May hung over Cincinnati on the evening of May 20th, 1987. The kind of humid night that made the air feel heavier, tempers shorter. On Liddell Avenue, in a modest home tucked into a quiet neighborhood, Leola Douglas prepared for what she thought would be an ordinary night. She was 27 years old, a mother of 2, known in her community for her kindness and fierce devotion to her family. Her house was humble but full of life, until Anthony Kirkland walked through her door. What followed wasn't a confrontation that could be talked down. It was sudden, violent, and irreversible. An argument ignited between them. Neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices, then a single scream. Inside that house, something in Kirkland snapped. He closed the distance between them. His hands found her throat. She fought back, fiercely at first, clawing, shoving, trying to break free. But he was stronger, driven by a surge of uncontrolled rage. He tightened his grip, ignoring her gasps, her nails digging into his arms. Her desperate struggle grew weaker, her movement slowing as oxygen drained from her body. Her scream turned to a rasp, then silence. When it was over, she lay motionless on the floor of her own home, the air heavy, the room still. Kirkland stood over her, chest heaving, facing the consequences of what he'd just done. And then, like he would do so many times in the future, he turned to fire. He gathered nearby flammable materials, clothing, papers, whatever he could find, and set the house ablaze. The flames spread quickly, climbing walls and devouring furniture. He fled into the night as black smoke billowed from the windows, leaving Leola Douglas's body behind to burn. The fire was reported quickly. Neighbors saw the glow and called 911. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed. Crews forced their way inside, crawling through heat and choking smoke to contain the blaze. Inside, in what was left of the living room, they found Leola Douglas's body, burned but not completely consumed. The fire's damage was severe, but the autopsy revealed the true cause of death. She had died before the fire. Forensic pathologists found petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, clear signs of manual strangulation. Bruising around her neck told the same story. His hands had squeezed the life out of her. The burns were post-mortem. The fire had been set to cover up the killing. Investigators quickly pieced the timeline together. Witness statements placed Kirkland at the house that evening. The scream, the fire, his abrupt disappearance. The evidence pointed to him with chilling clarity. Kirkland was arrested shortly afterward. At just 18, Anthony Kirkland stood before a judge, not as a confused boy, but as a killer who strangled a woman to death and burned her home. He pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated arson, receiving 25 years to life in prison. For most, that would have been the end of their story. But prison didn't rehabilitate Anthony Kirkland. It sharpened him. He earned his GED. He participated in programs. He learned to say the right things. By 2003, after serving roughly 16 years, parole boards reviewed his file. They saw progress. They decided he was ready to return to society. When Anthony Kirkland walked out of prison on September 3, 2003, after 16 years behind bars for the killing of Leola Douglas, the city of Cincinnati barely noticed. There were no headlines, no news conferences, no warnings to the neighborhoods where he would soon roam. A man who had strangled, burned, and killed was simply released. By October 25, 2004, he was officially off parole, a free man, and almost immediately, the pattern began to reemerge. On January 25, 2005, Kirkland was accused of a violent sexual assault in Evanston. A female neighbor came forward, claiming that Kirkland had raped her at knife point inside her home. A jury acquitted him in October 2005, but the accusation itself was telling. Barely 2 years after his release, Kirkland was once again at the center of a predatory crime, testing the boundaries, watching how close he could get without consequence. But eventually, his worry of consequences dissipated. May 4, 2006. The night air over Avondale was thick with humidity. Streetlights flickered softly, casting tired orange glows on cracked sidewalks. 14-year-old Cassania Crawford, nicknamed Cherie by friends and family, was bright, stubborn, and restless. Just after 11 p.m., she quietly slipped out of her grandmother's house, promising she wouldn't be long. She walked alone through her neighborhood, unaware that a predator watched from the darkness. Anthony Kirkland moved through those streets with purpose, patient, deliberate. He followed Shari toward a wooded dead end, away from the safety of passing cars and porch lights. She may have sensed someone behind her. She may have turned, startled, but by then it was too late. He grabbed her suddenly, dragging her into the darkness of the woods. She screamed, she fought, but he overpowered her. He brutally raped her. Then, his hands locked around her throat, cutting off her breath. She clawed at him, scraping his skin, struggling for air as panic surged. The world narrowed to a blur, then darkness. When she went still, he dragged her body to a clearing cluttered with discarded tires. He piled them over her like debris. He found a piece of timber nearby, struck a flame, and lit the pile. Rubber caught slowly, then roared. The flames twisted and climbed, searing flesh and rubber into indistinguishable black smoke. He stood for a moment, stirring the fire with the timber, watching her identity disappear into flame. Then he walked away. 5 days later, on May 9, 2006, city workers clearing the area stumbled upon the pile of old tires. Beneath them, they found charred human remains. The ground was scorched. The air still carried the sickening scent of burned flesh. Detectives arrived to a grim scene. A body nearly destroyed by fire, teeth knocked loose by blunt trauma, surrounded by evidence of deliberate burning. This was his first known murder after parole, and it would define his signature. Strangulation, post-mortem burning, isolation. Only weeks later, Kirkland killed again. June 14, 2006, in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. Mary Jo Newton, 45, walked the streets alone that evening. She was known in the area, struggling with addiction, vulnerable. Kirkland spotted her and approached. They left together. At some point that night, in a secluded dead end near Workman Street, he struck. After he was done with her, he wrapped his hands around her throat, squeezing with the same mechanical cruelty. She struggled briefly, then went still. She was dead before the fire began. He dragged her body into the weeds, doused it with accelerant, and set it alight. The flames rose into the night sky, painting the empty lot in orange and black. He watched for a moment, then slipped away unnoticed. The next morning, June 15th, firefighters responded to reports of smoldering remains at the dead end. The body was still warm when they arrived. Dental records would be required for identification. The fire had destroyed almost everything else. The autopsy revealed that she had died from manual strangulation before her body was set on fire. She was found at 783 Workman. The location was less than half a mile from where Kasonia had been found. The methods were identical. The escalation was undeniable. By the end of the year, Kirkland's predation had become routine. June 13, 2008. A Labrador retriever wandered from its yard near Pult Street in Cincinnati and came back carrying a human femur. Police followed the trail into the woods at the dead end of the street, where they unearthed a shallow scatter of burned bones. No flesh, no clothing, just fragments of a body destroyed by fire. The coroner couldn't determine exactly how she died, but on her neck vertebra, there was a clean, deep cut, carved by a blade driven with purpose. Months later, DNA gave the remains a name, Kimya Rawlison, missing since 2006. Anthony Kirkland called her Kim. He said he picked her up one night, paid her for sex, and when an argument erupted in his van, he grabbed her own knife and slashed her throat. He laid her body on a bed of wood, doused it with lighter fluid, and watched it burn before covering the ashes. Her father said he used to imagine the worst. Then he learned the truth. Kirkland's next kill wouldn't be for years to come, but he by no means cleaned up his act. May 14, 2007. Kirkland barricaded himself inside 860 Ridgeway Avenue, threatening to kill his 18-month-old son during a SWAT standoff. Officers swarmed the home. Negotiations stretched into tense hours. Inside, Kirkland raged. When the situation finally ended, he was arrested and later convicted of 2 counts of unlawful restraint, serving 115 days in jail. A police source would later say, "He seemed crazed. You could feel the volatility in the air." That fall, September 17, 2007, Reverend Walter Bledsoe sought a restraining order against Kirkland. Court records don't specify the catalyst, but by December 2007, a judge granted the order. Even those on the periphery of Kirkland's life were taking legal steps to keep him away. Then, on September 26, 2007, Kirkland crossed another boundary. He solicited sex from his girlfriend's 13-year-old daughter. In March 2008, he was convicted of importuning, sentenced to 1 year in prison, and officially designated a sex offender. He was now required to register his address with the sheriff's office, a safeguard that would later prove devastatingly ineffective. Released yet again on October 20, 2008, Kirkland entered the Pogue Rehabilitation Center, a halfway house in Over-the-Rhine. But by February 27, 2009, his violent temperament resurfaced. Late that night, Kirkland got into a fight with another resident. Police responded, but the victim refused to press charges. Staff expelled Kirkland for rule violations, but in a critical oversight, they waited 2 days before alerting his parole officer. In those 2 days, Anthony Kirkland disappeared. March 1, 2009. Kirkland returned to his former home on Ridgeway Avenue. He broke in, hid in the bathroom, and attacked Frederick Hughes with scissors, stabbing him at least 10 times before fleeing. Hughes survived, but the attack triggered a warrant for aggravated burglary and felonious assault. By March 2nd, Kirkland's parole officer was looking for him. Warrants stacked up. Failure to register, assault, parole violations. On March 5th, he threatened Roberta Baldwin, the mother of his child, with a knife. Another warrant followed. At this point, his life slipped completely out of control. Former neighbors described him as paranoid, unpredictable, like he was ready to explode. One investigator would later put it bluntly: the system knew who he was. The problem was, by the time all the red flags were noticed, Anthony Kirkland was already gone. On March 7, 2009, Anthony Kirkland claimed his 5th victim. 13-year-old Esme Kenny was everything Kirkland's previous victims weren't. Young, bright, from a stable home. She was a talented student at Cincinnati's School for Creative and Performing Arts. March 7, 2009, Winton Hills Reservoir, Cincinnati. 13-year-old Esme Kenny laced up for a solo jog around the water. When she didn't come home, her mother called 911 and officers fanned into the wooded paths. In the search area, 2 officers found a man sitting under a tree, Anthony Kirkland. Seeing knives in his pocket, they disarmed him and discovered a purple wristwatch and an iPod etched, "Property of Esme Kenny." He first gave a false name and claimed he'd found the items. Officers took him to the station while the search continued. Around 3 a.m., searchers found Esme's body in the woods near the path. She was nude, except for shoes and socks, propped against a fallen limb with arms crossed and legs apart. Her groin, inner thighs, and left hand had been burned. The coroner ruled death by ligature strangulation, a fractured hyoid, ligature marks, and heavy facial petechiae indicating a long fight, 8 to 10 minutes. There was blunt force hemorrhaging under her scalp, and pre-mortem trauma to the vagina consistent with attempted penetration. Days later, police traced a trail of burned clothing to a bag holding Esme's sweatpants and underwear. Her cut, burned top was found in a nearby lot. DNA consistent with Esme's was recovered from Kirkland's hands, penis, and boxer shorts. Partial shoe prints at the scene matched the type of sneakers he wore. On March 9, 2009, Anthony Kirkland was placed under arrest. Anthony Kirkland sat alone in a gray interrogation room inside Cincinnati Police Headquarters. The space was plain and cold. White walls, a metal table, and a single camera perched in the corner like an unblinking eye. Detectives watched him from behind the glass. He leaned back in the chair, arms folded, eyes drifting between the table and the door. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't afraid, he looked bored. When detectives entered, they didn't start with shouting or threats. They started with the facts. They told him a young girl had been found burned in the woods near Spring Grove. They told him witnesses had seen him nearby. They told him about the scratches on his arms, the smell of smoke on his clothes. At first, he denied everything. He said he'd been drinking in the woods, that he didn't know any Esme Kenny, that he'd fallen asleep somewhere out of sight. His voice was flat. His answers clipped. But these detectives were seasoned. They had worked too many homicide cases to miss the small cracks in his story. And unlike his earlier victims, this case had momentum, forensic teams, public pressure, and Esme's grieving family waiting for answers. They pressed harder. As the hours stretched on, Kirkland's demeanor began to shift. His hostility softened into a strange, calm detachment. He didn't crumble emotionally. He didn't lash out. He simply settled into the role of storyteller. One detective would later describe it like this: it was like he was recounting errands. No emotion, no hesitation. Just step by step, like he was talking about what he picked up at the store. Eventually, Kirkland admitted what they already suspected. He had attacked Esme Kenny. He confessed to strangling her in the woods, dragging her body deeper among the trees, sexually assaulting her post-mortem, and then setting her on fire. He described it with chilling clarity, his voice unwavering, as though he were reciting something practiced. And then, as if a floodgate opened, he began to confess to the others. Casonia Crawford, May 2006. Mary Jo Newton, June 2006. Kimya Rollison, December 2006. Now sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of that room, Anthony Kirkland gave investigators everything they needed. Not with tears or regret, but with the eerie calm of a man who had nothing left to hide. The trial of State of Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland began in August 2010, inside the Hamilton County Common Pleas Court. Kirkland sat at the defense table wearing a plain shirt and glasses. His expression was as cold and unreadable as it had been in the interrogation room. He rarely looked up, rarely made eye contact with the families sitting only a few feet away. Jurors stole occasional glances at him, looking for some trace of humanity in his face. They didn't find it. The prosecution opened with blunt force. 4 women and girls are dead. They were strangled, burned, and discarded, and the man responsible sits before you. From there, they built their case methodically, layer by layer. They began with forensics. They heard about ligature marks, petechial hemorrhaging, burn patterns, and DNA evidence. They saw photographs from each crime scene, images so brutal that some jurors visibly recoiled. Even seasoned detectives shifted uncomfortably as the pictures were projected onto the courtroom screens. Then came the confession tapes. The jury listened as Kirkland's own voice filled the room, steady and disturbingly casual, as he described how he stalked his victims, strangled them, and burned their bodies. He didn't stumble. He didn't cry. He sounded almost detached. One juror would later say that it wasn't the photographs that haunted them most. It was his voice. As testimony piled up, a portrait of a serial killer emerged. One who had operated undetected for years, choosing victims who would not be quickly missed, hiding his crimes in fire and darkness. The families sat through it all. They heard every word, saw every photo, listened to his confessions. Some cried quietly. Others stared at him with cold hatred. Esme Kenny's parents sat together, hands entwined tightly, as if holding on to each other was the only way to endure hearing their daughter's last moments laid out in evidence. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 3.5 hours. Their verdict, guilty on all counts, aggravated murder, arson, and related charges. On August 28, 2010, Anthony Kirkland stood as the judge read the sentence. He received the death penalty for the murders of Esme Kenny and Casonia Crawford, life sentences for the murders of Mary Jo Newton and Kimya Rollison. Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters called Kirkland one of the most evil individuals I have ever prosecuted. Kirkland showed no visible reaction as the sentence was announced. No tears, no rage, no fear. Just the same icy stillness he had shown throughout the trial.